This Battlefront 2 news is devastating, I want to say heartbreaking, but it's also a testament to the dedication the developers put into developing this game and keeping it alive for as long as they did before it was tragically cancelled.
We've realized our vision with Star Wars Battlefront 2.
No. Wait.
Basically, a bunch of new details have emerged over the past few months on Reddit specifically, detailing what else was coming to Battlefront 2 and a lot of content that never made it into the game. Some developers have revealed plans to bring, for example, Ahsoka to the game, Asajj Ventress, planets like Coruscant, Mustafa, Umbara, plus a bunch of other skins, weapons, and just general ideas for the game before it was cancelled so that DICE could focus more of their resources on Battlefield 2042, which I think everyone is really disappointed about, considering that game released to be quite disappointing. And not only that, we've also been given some insight into why Battlefront 2 was actually cancelled, and why Battlefront 3 still isn't and probably will never be a thing. I'll get to that a little later. We're going to go through all of this information. I'm going to pack as much in as possible, and I hope you enjoy this and don't cry along with me, because I will likely be crying at some point. Hey everyone, it's Andrew. So a lot of the footage I'm going to be using in this video is from mods and gameplay I've captured using mods to demonstrate what could have actually been in the game. I've made a few other Battlefront 2 videos showcasing these community-made mods. Dude, there's something wrong with the Ewok skins. Why doesn't he have a face? Oh my... They're really cool if you want to check them out after you watch this. So a lot of these details come from the Star Wars Battlefront subreddit, where some of the former DICE devs who worked on Battlefront 2 still frequent, and they're still involved in the community. And a lot of this info is specifically from Matt Helge, who was a live producer on Battlefront 2 right up until the time the game was cancelled, and has also worked on the game after it was cancelled, even after moving on to another studio, no longer working at DICE. But Dennis Brandvold, the lead developer, is also going to get a mention in this video, some stuff he said over the past year or so.
We'll be going deep into the Clone Wars.
So developers at studios like DICE sometimes get to do these things called dev jams, which is basically a few days dedicated to them working on basically whatever they want. It's kind of an idea to come up with new creative ideas to add to games. And this is how, for example, droidicas were made in Battlefront 2, how dual wield got made, and also where Felucia came from. A few developers get together, start building it in a few days, and then the team pitches it to the higher ups and it gets developed out to be finally added to the game months down the track. And apparently Mustafa was actually a map the developers wanted to add to the game, however in a limited capacity. Mustafa was always in the backlog, but as a hero showdown map only. So from a value perspective of we make one map every 6 months, what use do we get out of it? It doesn't make much sense. And this is also part of why Coruscant never made it into Battlefront 2. For a city planet on that scale with that amount of detail to be brought into Battlefront 2, a game that's, let's be real, is made for last gen consoles, poses development troubles like memory issues and backdrop issues. There's basically not enough power in the consoles to create a map like that. So it was something that was completely shelved and never really something the developers wanted to do specifically. For example, the developers had memory issues with Bespin, and this is the reason a map like Coruscant never made it into the game. It requires too much memory, too much power, too many technical difficulties, and therefore Coruscant never made it into the game. I mean, we can even look at Coruscant in Jedi Survivor, and as cool as Coruscant being in that game is, it's not really that detailed and there's not really that many people or cars or things around it. It feels a bit lifeless at times, and I think that's a limitation of the technology, of time, and of the amount of effort they are able to put into a single map. Possibly also why Star Wars 1313 never happened. Still sad about that one, over 10 years later after it was cancelled, but that would have been the immersive Coruscant game I think we've all been hoping for years. The planet Umbara was also near the top of the developers' wish list for new maps for the game, but to bring Umbara to the game would have been apparently months of work. It would have required potentially new units and a new mode for the fog of war kind of stuff. The developers have stated they were generally always trying to focus on authenticity, so just adding a bunch of droids on Umbara wouldn't have really been appropriate. And apparently DICE were also working on bringing Asajj Ventress and Ahsoka Tano to the game sometime before the game was cancelled. Apparently there was actually a prototype for Ahsoka that had been made in the game, with motion capture of stunt performers actually captured, and dual wield gameplay also briefly developed. When it came to Ahsoka, this was an issue of approvals from Lucasfilm. Ahsoka was of course going to show up in The Mandalorian and then eventually in Ahsoka. So it wasn't something Lucasfilm were necessarily going to allow, considering they wanted to bring the character to the shows. However, I feel like that would have tied in with the shows. There's probably a problem with approvals here. They want to keep the character kind of sacred for a while and not release anything until the show comes out, and then they can use the character in other media like video games, books, whatever else. But I don't get that, honestly. If that's like an exposure problem, like they're worried Ahsoka Tano is going to become too played, I mean, look what they've been doing with Darth Vader. Darth Vader's literally everywhere recently. Anakin, Darth Vader, these sacred characters are becoming overused in some ways, so I don't understand why it would be an approval issue when it comes to actually putting a character like that in the game. Curious to know your thoughts on that. And if that was the case, why not just do a Clone Wars themed Ahsoka? Clone Wars Season 7 came out in 2019, around the time Battlefront 2 was still pretty hot. Also, apparently Ahsoka is completely under Dave Filoni's control, and he can kind of do what he likes with the game, being one of Lucasfilm's way higher ups. So to get approval from Dave to bring this character to the game when he's developing Ahsoka series was probably not going to happen. Come on, Dave. Let us have Ahsoka, please.
Okay.
There was also a rumor that the ISB agent, who was added to the game a bit later on, was created using repurposed assets from the cancelled Ahsoka, which partly was true. Apparently the ISB agent had a lot of things thrown at it to make it work. And at that point in time, the developers on Battlefront 2 who were still working on the game were a very small team. So we're doing lots of hacking to make this kind of stuff work. So with Ahsoka and Asajj Ventress being on the top of the developers list for adding new heroes to the game beyond the content we already got, the developers wanted to release them alongside a Dathomir map. Sabine was also apparently a character they wanted to add to the game to get a flying option for the light side, like we had Boba Fett for the dark side characters, the villains. And apparently there was also a push to put Yaddle in the game.
What?
Just because creating the Yoda animations was so hard and took so long, and the developers wanted to make more out of them rather than just have them go to a single character. Although I think these are more just wishes. A lot of the wishes they had to develop the game were pretty far out there and pretty time-consuming things to make, but they obviously weren't able to make everything. But that's the thing with Battlefront 2. If the development on this game had continued, if it had a live service still to this day and was releasing content alongside the TV shows and every other Star Wars project that's coming out,
I thought you'd never ask.
maybe some of these ideas could have become a reality, and I think that's the tragedy here. That's what makes this so sad. Hearing all these things that could have been added to the game, and yet were shelved, for reasons I'll get to very soon. It's really interesting hearing some of the other characters the developers wanted to add to the game as well, because they might not be the ones you wanted. Like I mentioned, Sabine was on the radar, but then they also had plans for Captain Rex and Cad Bane as a villain. And these characters would have been brought to the game before other characters who were on the list, like Plo Koon and Qui-Gon Jinn. And in some ways that's surprising, but also not really. If we look back at Star Wars Battlefront from 2015, which had Greedo, Nien Nunb, Dengar, characters like those added to the game who I don't think anyone was really ever expecting would be added. If we look at that, you can understand why they wanted to add some of these, especially considering the Clone Wars and Rebels era, the fact those were still fresh titles at the time, and the fact we were also revisiting some of these characters in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. Also, when it came to characters like Ahsoka and Ventress, or adding any characters to the game, the developers had kind of a yin and yang approach, with Ahsoka and Ventress being both dual-wielding lightsaber characters. Some of their abilities and moves and likely animations would mirror each other in some ways. And this is kind of how the developers established balance between both teams. Both teams obviously still have to remain equal so that there's not discrepancies. I know everyone remembers when Anakin was more powerful than anything in the entire game. But if they introduce one character, they'd also want another character to go with it that would counter that character. Now, a lot of you might be wondering why certain skins weren't added to the game. Well, there was an idea for a skin for Chewbacca where C3PO would be on his back, and apparently this wasn't done because of the price of voice acting.
How rude.
This was on the list of things to do, but the voice of C3PO is not cheap. So even if creating the model in-game would have been easy, the cost was far too high. Basically paying voice actors, especially a voice actor like Anthony Daniels, who apparently has the first right of denial on his character. So Anthony Daniels wants to do every C3PO ever, anywhere, and he's always asked if he wants to do it first. And if he says yes, he can claim his normal rate for voice acting. Now, being C3PO, you can imagine his rate is probably pretty high, in the thousands and thousands of dollars.
Credits will do fine.
No, they won't.
But you might be wondering, isn't it just cheaper to get him to record a few lines? That's not really how voice acting works. I'm pretty sure you have to book the actor for the entire day, even if you just need 10 minutes of work. So the best way these studios get actors to come in like this, I have to book them for a full day, and then add a marketing campaign ad to them, do a behind the scenes interview, do some extra bonus content, and make it worthwhile for both the actor and for the development of the game and all the marketing that goes around it. But you can imagine for doing a single skin, that's probably not going to be worth it. Now, I don't know how to feel about this next comment. Apparently the developers didn't really care about adding new loadouts or guns to the games. Instead, their focus was on characters and outfits, skins. And if you go and play some of the modded Battlefront 2 versions on PC, like Battlefront Plus, for example, it's really cool seeing how many other weapons are in the game and how much diversity this adds to each class. But the fact this wasn't something the developers were really that interested in is a little bit disappointing. We all know, I think they had pretty limited resources, so clearly had to put their time and energy towards things that were actually going to make a bigger difference rather than just adding a few extra weapons to the game. But overall, this just adds more disappointment to the fact that more developers weren't working on Battlefront 2 and weren't turning it into the live service game that would continue on for Star Wars that I think we all want. Apparently, lightsaber characters as reinforcements was something that was somewhat considered as well, and this is something that exists in some of the PC mod packs I mentioned before, the community made ones, but lightsaber reinforcements would have been problematic from a lore gaming perspective. There was apparently an internal hack where there were some generic Jedi in the game, like Padawans and just regular Jedi Knights, I guess, from the Jedi Temple, like the generic ones we've had in other games like Revenge of the Sith, Battlefront 2, the ones you kill in the Jedi Temple, 2005 game. This was never something that was proposed to any of the higher-ups and never something that was pitched to be put into the game. This is really insightful because even some of the developers don't think instant action is that great, even though it's something they worked on and was a fan-requested feature from the original Battlefront 2 way back in 2005. It was something we wanted in 2017's Battlefront 2 and we got it, but some developers believe it's not that great.
Liar!
It never got any love or further development after it was initially launched, and it's packed with problems like no leveling, there's weird buggy AI, and it's just overall a bit of a dodgy experience, I want to say. A lot more time was put into co-op missions, which caters to a similar type of gameplay and is a more refined experience overall. I personally love instant action. I loved it in the old Battlefront 2. I still think it's better in the old Battlefront 2. I'm glad 2017's Battlefront 2 has it, but it's not somewhere I really spent a lot of time, to be honest. Co-op is pretty fun. Have you ever wondered why there's no ship phase for the Age of the Rebellion Supremacy maps? Apparently it's because the developers didn't have time to build a full ship for this era, and it also didn't fully make sense canonically for every planet. The Clone Wars had more of this, it made more sense in-universe to do this, so there's a bit of both excuses. But they basically didn't have the resources to make these large-scale interior maps of the capital ships just for certain Rebellion era maps like Hoth, where it would have made sense to have them. Now, there was also a question asked about sequel era content and whether it's true that EA prioritized sequel content over prequel content. And apparently it was more complicated than this. The developers wanted to do tie-ins to what was actually being released at the time. So the team didn't shy away when they were able to make content that aligned with movies, like all the Rise of Skywalker and Last Jedi content we got. It sounds like EA saw the value in this and would give the thumbs up a lot more easily for these projects because they knew that they were tie-in projects and they'd likely get more people playing the game. However, that said, apparently the dev team were huge Clone Wars fans.
We'll be going deep into the Clone Wars.
And I think that's clear in basically everything we know about the developers, everything we've seen about them, and the Clone Wars content that was inevitably what saved Battlefront 2, for a little while anyway. And apparently the Clone Wars content that was pushed into the game that created the spark that brought the game back to life wasn't EA asking for Clone Wars, it was just to make people happy after the horrendous launch this game had where they were being accused of child gambling and giving everyone a sense of pride and accomplishment. Remember that, guys? You guys might remember way back, Star Wars Battlefront 2 had seasons. Well, at least least an initial season 1, and then apparently Solo was supposed to be an attempt at a season 2, and apparently doing a season plan similar to a game like Fortnite, I guess, was in the works before launch, but with the launch the game had, and then the complete rework of the progression systems, and then also a reduction in the team that were working on the game, they simply didn't have the resources to pull off another season. So they just started to drip feed new content with the community updates instead. Again, this is kind of disappointing, but I guess the game just wasn't making enough money to have seasons. It seemed like the initial model with Battlefront 2 was, of course, to get people to buy the Kyber loot box things, I can't even remember what they're called, to spend real money in the game, similar to a Fortnite system, but when you've already paid $90 or $100 for the game, and then you want to pay more just to unlock Darth Vader, it's going to be problematic. You're gonna get people who are upset.
This is outrageous.
Which is exactly what happened, which is why the seasons never became a thing. Still, once again, disappointing. I feel like if Battlefront 2 had a smooth launch and actually things were on track right from the beginning of the game, then all of this could have been so different. We could be living in an alternate timeline where Battlefront 2 was actually still running and successful, and so much was still... this is the part where I do start crying. You might be wondering what happened to Jed Pack Cargo, that limited time game mode that was added to the game and then removed several years ago. Well, apparently it was just way too buggy to keep in the game and had to be archived by the developers due to very deep tech issues. Even though I remember it being a fan favorite, apparently the resources to fix it would have cost an arm and a leg and been way too expensive, and something that the small dev team that was still working on this game could have never pulled off, which is kind of disappointing, but honestly, it's not really the focus of the game. Jed Pack Cargo was fun, and I'm pretty sure there are mods out there that let you play it. I don't know how buggy they are, but again, kind of just a bit of a gimmick. Ewok Hunt is where it's at.
No, run! No!
Some insight was also offered into where most people play this game, so if you're still looking to play Battlefront 2 now, apparently console is the place to be, because 75 to 80% of players are on console. I don't know how true that is. I've found games on both console and PC, although I will say I think console was a little bit better and was more populated, even in off-peak times. But apparently developers also saw a 2 or 3 times increase of unique users on the weekend of May the 4th. New people playing the game around that time, just because I guess it's on special and everyone's thinking about Star Wars on May the 4th. So people are still spiking the game on that day. Here's another one that's kind of disappointing that might have kept Battlefront 2 alive. There were plans for crossplay, for you to be playing on Xbox against PlayStation and PC users, and across all of them. It was something the developers pushed for, even got to the stage of having meetings to develop, but the resources that were needed to create this were just not there. I feel like had Battlefront 2 released a few years later, with crossplay becoming much more of a norm nowadays, we might have had crossplay in the game and Battlefront 2 might have had more life and you wouldn't struggle to find lobbies of players. So the big question you've been waiting for, why was Battlefront 2 actually cancelled? And why was Battlefront 3 never made? About a year ago, Dennis Brandville actually said that he left DICE because they wouldn't let him develop Star Wars Battlefront 3. And a lot of the DICE developers who worked on Battlefront 2 have moved on to other studios and are no longer working on Star Wars. That said, I think a lot of them potentially would come back if Battlefront 3 was on the cards in the future, which it seems like it's not. They seem to be so passionate about Star Wars and held Battlefront 2 so close to their hearts that they'd jump on the opportunity to make Battlefront 3 a reality. And it's so sad hearing the main reason Battlefront 2 didn't continue was because new resources were needed for development of Battlefield 2042, possibly the most disappointing Battlefield game ever released. And for a lot of the DICE developers that worked on Star Wars, transitioning to Battlefield was just not going to be that easy, and was something I think a lot of them probably didn't want to do. But this was the official reason. They needed more people for Battlefield. And apparently there were a few other reasons from some of the other higher-ups at the studio. But what's crazy is that the developers knew the game was being cancelled before Celebration Edition was even released. And this is part of why the developers decided to release Celebration Edition and basically try and give us players everything. It was kind of like the last hurrah of the game, to get rid of the loot box stigma that was surrounding this game ever since launch and to just give us all the content. In some ways for us, I think Celebration Edition looked like a relaunch of Battlefront 2, like it was getting a new life and development was going to continue. But unfortunately, that wasn't the reality. It was the final goodbye of the developers, saying, thank you for supporting us, thank you for letting us do what we wanted to do with this game up until this point. Here is everything we can possibly give you all at once. The developers knew they were heading for shutdown on the game around mid-original trilogy work. when they were still working on the original trilogy era of content, which was quite a while back, if we're being honest. And they actually pushed for an extension before doing Celebration Edition so that they could add everything they wanted to the game. It's honestly so hard to swallow all of this information, knowing what could have been with this game. But if there's one thing you'd want to add to Battlefront 2, I'd love to hear what that is, so let me know in the comments. And also, modders are keeping this game alive. Sure, we might not have planets like Umbara, Coruscant, and Mustafa in the actual official Battlefront 2, but they do exist in the game. If you want to see 27 modded maps added to Battlefront 2, then watch this video here. And thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew, I'll catch you soon.